The rain had been falling steadily for hours, blanketing Seattle in its familiar silver-gray gloom. Streetlights cast fragmented halos on the wet pavement, and the air was thick with the scent of damp asphalt and exhaust. It was past midnight when the screech of tires shattered the hush of the hour, a sudden jarring sound that echoed through the otherwise sleeping city. Ethan Walker's sports car spun wildly out of control, hydroplaning across the rain-slicked road. The vehicle slammed into the median with a crunch of metal and a burst of shattering glass. For a moment, there was only silence, punctuated by the faint ticking of a broken turn signal blinking into the void. Inside the wreckage, Ethan lay slumped over the steering wheel, unconscious. Blood trickled down his forehead, mingling with the rainwater streaming in through the shattered window. The elegant gray suit he wore, tailored, expensive, impeccable, was now soaked, crumpled and torn. A phone buzzed on the passenger seat, unanswered, the screen glowing with a missed call and a name, Marcus Lee. The street was eerily quiet. No other cars passed by. It was as if the city itself held its breath. 10 minutes later, a taxi turned the corner and screeched to a halt at the sight of the mangled vehicle. The driver rushed out, rain soaking through his clothes as he struggled to pry the door open. "Sir, can you hear me?" he shouted, voice laced with panic. There was no answer. The man reached for his phone with trembling fingers and called emergency services. "There's been a serious accident." "Yes, corner of Lakeview and Broadmoor. One male, unconscious, bleeding. Please hurry." Within minutes, sirens pierced the night air. St. Harmony General Hospital was a hub of constant motion even in the darkest hours of the night. Nurses moved quickly between rooms, monitors beeped in sterile rhythms, and fluorescent lights bathed the halls in a pale clinical glow. Dr. Rachel Morgan was reviewing patient charts at the ER desk when the paramedics burst through the doors with a stretcher. Male, mid-30s, car collision, suspected internal bleeding, multiple lacerations, unconscious. "BP is dropping fast," one of them shouted. Rachel immediately stood, already snapping on her gloves and motioning to the trauma room. "Let's move, people." She didn't look at the patient's face. Not yet. She was in her zone now, calm, efficient, focused. Years of experience had honed her instincts, even if her eyes showed the fatigue of a double shift. The trauma team surrounded the patient, working quickly to stabilize him. Rachel grabbed the chart handed to her by the paramedic and glanced at the name, Ethan Walker. She froze. For a split second, the room spun. No. It couldn't be. Her hands hesitated as she moved closer, lifting the bloodied cloth from his face. Her breath caught in her throat. It was him. Not Ethan Walker. Ethan Carter. Her ex-husband. The man who had once promised her forever, only to vanish when forever became complicated. 100 memories surged to the surface, his laugh, the way he used to trace her wrist with his thumb, the final argument that shattered them both. Rachel swallowed hard, steadying her hands. "Dr. Morgan," a nurse said, confused by her sudden pause. Rachel blinked. "Focus. He's a patient. Just a patient. Let's prep him for CT and get an abdominal ultrasound," she ordered, voice clipped. "Cross-match for blood transfusion. We need to assess internal bleeding immediately." The team moved in sync. Rachel's heart, however, refused to stay silent. She moved beside him, inserting a line into his vein, her fingers brushing against his cold, bruised skin. She could hear the whisper of the machines, the crackle of the rain outside, the steady beep of his faltering pulse. Why now? Why here? Why him? Later, in the surgical suite, Rachel stood over Ethan's unconscious body as the anesthesiologist announced the patient was under. His vitals were dropping. The scans showed a ruptured spleen and internal hemorrhaging. He needed surgery immediately. Rachel hesitated again. Another doctor on the team, Dr. Allen, stepped up. "I can take lead on this one," he offered gently. "You look shaken." Rachel looked at Ethan, the man who had once left her without looking back. Her jaw clenched. "No," she said, voice firm. "I'll operate." No one argued. She scrubbed in, her movements practiced, almost mechanical. Inside, her mind was chaos, but her hands were steady. Scalpel. Clamp. Suction. Time slowed, the sounds of the or fading into the background. Her eyes never left the field as she worked to stop the bleeding, to repair the damage, to preserve the life that had once intertwined with hers in ways no one else in the room could imagine. But Ethan didn't know she was there. Didn't know that the woman holding the scalpel, keeping his heart from stopping, was the one he had left behind. 2 hours later, the surgery was declared a success. Ethan was stabilized, though still unconscious. Rachel stood outside the ICU room, her scrubs stained with blood, her hands trembling now that the crisis was over. She stared at him through the glass, oxygen mask over his face, monitors tracking every breath, every beat. She hadn't seen him in almost 5 years. 5 years since he'd walked out after she was diagnosed with a condition that made it nearly impossible to have children. He hadn't yelled, hadn't fought. Just said, "I need something more," and walked away. And now he was back. Not by choice, not with flowers or apologies. But broken, bleeding, and on her operating table. Rachel sank into a nearby chair, resting her head in her hands. Outside, the rain had turned into a gentle drizzle. Somewhere down the hallway, the intercom called for a code blue. But in that moment, all Rachel could hear was the pounding of her heart and the question that refused to go away. Why had fate brought him back? And what was she supposed to do now? Rachel didn't sleep that night. After scrubbing out of surgery, she went through the motions, signed charts, updated notes, gave post-op instructions, but her mind kept circling back to the man lying in ICU room 7. She avoided looking at his name on the patient board. It wasn't Walker. It was Carter. Ethan Carter. She hadn't heard that name in 5 years, not since the divorce papers were signed in a quiet, sterile office downtown, under the dim glow of fluorescent lights and the weight of unspoken words. It wasn't just the shock of seeing him again. It was how helpless he looked. The man who once strode into boardrooms with relentless charm and ambition was now reduced to wires, bandages, and bruises. It stirred something in her that she didn't want to name. By 7 a.m., her shift ended. She peeled off her blood-streaked scrubs and stepped into the staff locker room, splashing cold water on her face. Her reflection looked foreign. Pale. Eyes shadowed with a storm of emotions. She reached into her locker and found her phone vibrating. A message blinked on screen from Michelle, morning rounds in 20. "You okay? You look like death warmed over." Rachel stared at the screen, fingers hovering, then replied, "Surgery ran long. I'll catch you later." She wasn't ready to talk. Not yet. Instead, she went back upstairs. ICU was quieter now. Nurses were doing rounds, checking vitals, whispering among themselves. Rachel hovered outside room 7 again, uncertain of her own motives. Ethan was still unconscious, his breathing steady but shallow. The bruising on his jaw had darkened, and a thin line of stitches traced his temple. He didn't look like the man she once loved. But then again, maybe neither did she. As she turned to leave, Marcus Lee stepped out from the waiting area. Dressed immaculately in a navy suit despite the hour, his sharp features looked tired but alert. "You're Dr. Morgan, correct?" he asked. Rachel froze. "Yes." "I'm Marcus Lee. Ethan's executive assistant. I've been handling everything since the accident. He has no immediate family here. I understand you were the lead surgeon." Rachel nodded, her voice neutral. "Yes. I was on call." Marcus studied her, his gaze unreadable. "I appreciate your professionalism. Ethan's recovery is the company's top priority right now. I've arranged private security, and we'd like to request discretion regarding his identity." "He was admitted as Ethan Walker," Rachel said calmly. "No one knows his real name. The staff is bound by confidentiality. You'll get no trouble from us." Marcus seemed to relax. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a slim envelope. "We'd like to offer a token of gratitude for your efforts. A donation in your name to the hospital, or compensation if you prefer." Rachel stepped back, cutting him off. "That's unnecessary," she said, a note of steel in her voice. "I did my job. Nothing more." "I understand," Marcus replied, slightly taken aback. He hesitated, then added, "Ethan, he's changed a lot. If he wakes up and recognizes you, it might help. Or complicate things. Just, please know he's not the man he was." Rachel didn't answer. Instead, she walked past him and left the ICU. Later that evening, Rachel sat in her apartment, nursing a lukewarm mug of chamomile tea. The blinds were half drawn, the soft hum of the city filtering through the windows. Her living room was modest, tidy, filled with warm tones and books. But tonight, it felt empty. She pulled out an old wooden box from under the couch. She hadn't opened it in years. Inside were fragments of another life, photos, ticket stubs, a wedding invitation now yellowed at the edges. And at the very bottom, the last letter Ethan had written her. She never read it. That day when he left, she found the envelope on the kitchen counter. By then, her heart had already been shattered. What could words do that his actions hadn't already undone? But now, she unfolded the letter with trembling fingers. "I'm sorry I couldn't be stronger," it read. "I'm sorry I made you feel less than whole. Il est Firwin. I thought I needed a family, a legacy, but I didn't see that you were already both. Job someday you forgive me. If not, I'll live with that. But please, don't ever think you were not enough. You were always too much for someone like me." Rachel stared at the page for a long time. The ink was slightly smudged, as if he'd cried while writing it. Maybe she had, too. 3 days passed before Ethan opened his eyes. It was subtle at first, a flicker, a furrow of his brow. A groan escaped his lips as he shifted against the pillow. Rachel wasn't there when it happened. She was in the hallway, discussing a new surgical consult with Dr. Sanderson. "A nurse called out, Britle. Dr. Morgan, room 7. He's awake." Her chest tightened. When she entered the room, Ethan was blinking slowly, disoriented. His face was pale, his movements sluggish. But when his gaze locked onto hers, everything changed. Recognition dawned like lightning. "Rachel," he croaked, voice hoarse and cracked. She stood rooted to the floor. He blinked again, as if unsure whether she was real. "Is it really you?" Rachel approached slowly, adjusting the foreline as a distraction. "I'm your attending physician for now," she said, keeping her tone clinical. "You were in a serious accident. Internal bleeding, fractured ribs. You've been unconscious for nearly 72 hours. Ethan flinched, but not from pain. I didn't know where I was. Or if I'd even made it." He swallowed. "But seeing you here was the last thing I expected." "You weren't supposed to be Ethan Walker either," she replied quietly. A shadow crossed his face. "I had to start over," he whispered. "Too many mistakes. Too many regrets." Silence filled the room. Rachel looked down at the monitors, the steady beep of his heart echoing in the sterile quiet. "I saved your life," she said finally. "C'était all." "I know," he said, eyes searching hers. "And I don't deserve it." Her hands tightened around the clipboard. "No," she said. "You don't." Then she turned and walked out of the room, the sound of her heels echoing in the corridor. Behind her, Ethan exhaled, the breath shaky, as if he'd been holding it for years. He had come back from the edge of death. But now, he wondered if coming back to life meant learning how to live with the wreckage he'd left behind. For the next few days, Rachel kept her distance. She made her rounds, checked charts, updated medication schedules, and supervised interns, but she always found a way to avoid room 7. If Ethan noticed, he didn't show it. He spent his time recovering in silence, staring out the window at the dreary Seattle skyline or thumbing through the books Marcus brought him. She told herself it was better this way. Professional. Detached. Safe. But every time she passed his room, her heart skipped the same uninvited beat. Dr. Michelle Sanderson noticed. On the 5th day, while they reviewed a case together in the staff lounge, Michelle closed the file and gave Rachel a look that pierced through her defenses. "You haven't talked to him," she said. Rachel stiffened. "I have. Medically." Michelle leaned forward. "Rachel, comment? You operated on your ex-husband. He nearly died on your table. And now he's just there. Awake. Alone. You can't pretend this isn't affecting you." "I'm not pretending anything," Rachel replied sharply. Then she sighed, letting her voice drop. I don't know what to say." Michelle gave her a moment before responding. "Maybe you don't need to say anything. Maybe you just need to listen." Rachel looked away. Listening would mean opening the door. And opening the door meant risking the storm she'd worked so hard to survive. That evening, after most of the hospital had quieted down, Rachel found herself standing outside Ethan's room again. The light inside was dimmed. Rain streaked the windows, casting liquid shadows across the tiled floor.
She knocked softly.
Ethan looked up from the book in his lap. "You don't have to knock," he said, voice still rough but steadier now. Rachel stepped inside, hands in the pockets of her white coat. "How are you feeling?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Like I lost a wrestling match with a truck." She nodded, the corner of her mouth twitching despite herself. "Vitals look stable. CT scans came back clean."
"You're lucky."
"Ironic," he said. "Luck hasn't been on my side lately." Silence hung between them for a beat. "I read somewhere," Ethan continued, "that near-death experiences make people re-evaluate everything. Priorities. Regrets. People they wronged." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess, you're suddenly a philosopher now?" "No," he said quietly. "Just a man trying to understand how badly he screwed up." He looked at her then, and for the first time since the accident, his expression wasn't clouded by pain or fatigue. It was clarity. And guilt. "Rachel, I don't even know where to begin." She crossed her arms, leaning lightly against the counter. "Try the part where you left without saying goodbye." His eyes dropped. "I was a coward," he admitted. "Back then, everything felt like it was slipping through my fingers. We just found out about the fertility issues. My company was collapsing. Investors were pulling out. I felt powerless. And instead of leaning on the person I loved, I ran."
She said nothing.
"I told myself I needed someone who could give me the family I wanted. But the truth is, I didn't even know what a family meant." Rachel's jaw clenched. "And now you do?" "I think I'm starting to." She shook her head slowly. "You don't get to just walk back into my life because you almost died." "I'm not asking to," he said gently. "I just want to say the things I should have said 5 years ago." Rachel looked at him then, really looked. His face was thinner, older. There was wear behind his eyes, years of strain, loneliness, perhaps remorse. "What happened to Ethan Carter?" she asked. "The man who thought he had to own the world to be happy?" "He crashed into a median on Lakeview Drive," Ethan replied with a ghost of a smile. "And woke up as someone else." She didn't laugh. "You broke me, Ethan." He flinched. "You broke something I didn't even know could be broken. You made me believe that being less than perfect meant being unlovable." His voice dropped. "You weren't less.
You were everything."
Rachel swallowed the lump in her throat. "I spent years rebuilding myself," she whispered.
"Brick by brick.
No shortcuts.
No distraction. And now you're here, bleeding into my life again."
"I know," he said. "And I don't expect anything from you. I just want you to know that I see you now. Not just the surgeon.
Not just the woman he failed.
I see the strength. The grace. The fire. And I'm sorry I didn't see it then." Rachel's hands trembled slightly, but she kept them hidden in her coat pockets. Ethan sat up straighter, wincing from the effort. "I still have a lot to make right," he said. "But even if you never forgive me, thank you."
For saving my life.
Rachel stared at him, the man who once held her dreams and her fears in equal measure. Then with a curt nod, she turned to leave. At the door, she paused. "I didn't save you for you," she said. "I saved you because it's what I do. Because someone had to." And she walked out, her footsteps echoing down the corridor like a heartbeat receding into silence. Back in her apartment that night, Rachel curled up on her couch, a glass of wine untouched on the table beside her. She stared out at the rain, thinking about the look on Ethan's face, the sincerity in his voice. Was it real? Or just another chapter in the long, messy novel of their past? She didn't know. But for the first time in a long time, she realized she wasn't angry anymore. Just tired. And maybe, just maybe, ready to listen. The days that followed unfolded slowly, marked by the rhythmic cadence of hospital life, rounds, charts, consultations. But beneath the surface routine, there was a quiet shift neither Rachel nor Ethan could ignore. Rachel continued to maintain her professional distance, but the walls she'd built over the past 5 years had begun to show cracks. Her steps slowed whenever she approached ICU Room 7. She found herself glancing at his chart longer than necessary, her thoughts drifting not to his vitals, but to the weight behind his words that night. Ethan, on the other hand, was growing stronger. The bruises on his body began to fade, but not the ones on his conscience. Each day he forced himself to walk a little further down the hallway, to answer the nurses with a bit more energy, to look people in the eyes. And each time he caught a glimpse of Rachel, even in passing, it grounded him in a way nothing else could. Still, there was a weight between them. It came in the form of silence and unsaid truths. Rachel didn't speak of the years after their divorce. Ethan didn't ask. But the unspoken questions hovered like smoke in the corners of every interaction. It was during one of Rachel's afternoon rounds that Dr. Sanderson pulled her aside. "You should know," Michelle said, handing over a folded sheet of paper. "A reporter came snooping around the ER yesterday, asking about Ethan Carter. Someone tipped them off." Rachel's expression darkened. "I thought he was admitted under a different name." "He was. But people talk. We've contained it for now, but if he stays here too long." Rachel nodded grimly.
Et elle let Marcus know.
That evening, she found Ethan sitting up in bed, flipping through a tablet Marcus had brought. He looked up as she entered. "We need to talk," she said. Ethan's brows drew together. "That sounds ominous." "There's been a leak.
A journaliste found out who you are.
They haven't gone public yet, but it's only a matter of time." Ethan sighed and leaned back. "Of course. Figures the past always finds a way to follow me." "You might want to consider transferring to a private recovery facility," Rachel suggested. "Somewhere outside the city. It would help keep things quiet." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, "Would you come visit me there?" Rachel hesitated, surprised by the question, and by her own reaction to it. "I'm not sure that's a good idea," she replied honestly. Ethan looked down at his hands, his voice quiet. "Yeah, I figured." The air between them tightened again. Rachel turned to leave, then paused at the door. "I'm recommending the transfer because it's best for your recovery," she said. "Not because I want you gone." "I know," Ethan said. "But maybe I needed to hear that anyway." 2 days later, the hospital made arrangements for Ethan to be discharged into the care of a private rehabilitation center in Bainbridge Island. The facility was secluded, discreet, and far removed from the media frenzy growing around Seattle's tech elite. The morning he was scheduled to leave, Rachel stopped by one last time. Ethan was dressed, seated in a wheelchair, waiting for the transport. Marcus stood nearby, talking logistics with the driver. Rachel handed him a sealed envelope. "Your discharge summary. Medications and follow-up instructions are inside." He took it, their fingers brushing for a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," he said. "For everything." Rachel nodded, heart tight in her chest. As he was wheeled out, she stayed by the window and watched the car pull away, disappearing into the drizzle. Only when it vanished around the corner did she allow herself to breathe deeply again. It felt like the end. But something inside her whispered, it wasn't. Back at the rehab facility, Ethan found himself surrounded by silence. No boardroom meetings, no endless emails, no roaring traffic or flashing cameras. Just the sea breeze, the rustling of pines, and the quiet hum of his own thoughts. He began journaling, a habit he'd abandoned in college. Pages filled with confessions, memories, questions. He wrote about Rachel, about the day she got the diagnosis, about the fear that crept into his veins and made him run. He wrote about the emptiness that followed success, the irony of building empires and losing the only thing that ever truly mattered. Each day, he took longer walks. He read books he'd once bought and never opened. He deleted social media accounts, turned off his phone for hours at a time. For the first time since he was 25, Ethan Carter, once the prodigy of Seattle's tech world, was learning how to be alone. And slowly, something shifted. Healing wasn't just about the body. It was about confronting the wreckage and finding the courage to rebuild. Meanwhile, Rachel buried herself in work. She picked up extra shifts, took on new surgeries, and volunteered for late-night ER coverage. She told herself it was about helping more patients, staying productive, being useful. But Michelle saw through it. One evening, as they scrubbed out from a particularly long trauma surgery, Michelle turned to her and said, "Are you punishing yourself?" Rachel didn't look up. For what? For still caring about him. Rachel froze. I don't care about him, she said, too quickly. Michelle just raised an eyebrow. Sure. I saved his life. That's what I was trained to do. But no one trained you to feel again. And yet here you are, working like you're trying to outrun something. Rachel bit the inside of her cheek. What if he hasn't changed? She asked finally. What if I let myself believe he's different now, and it turns out he's still the same man who walked out on me the moment things got hard? Then you'll survive that too, Michelle said gently. But don't let fear keep you from asking the right questions. Rachel looked at her hands, still red from scrubbing. Strong hands. Steady hands. And yet, her heart trembled. A week later, a letter arrived. Not an email. Not a text. A handwritten envelope, addressed to Dr. Rachel Morgan. Inside was a folded page, in Ethan's familiar script. I don't know what I'm hoping for by writing this. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But I needed to say that being near you again shook something loose in me. I've spent years building things that don't matter and losing the only thing that did. I'm not asking for a second chance. I'm asking for a conversation. Whenever you're ready. If ever. I'll be here. Below it, a simple line. Bainbridge Recovery, Room 203. Rachel sat with the letter for a long time, her fingers tracing the edges, her eyes rereading the words over and over. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't manipulation. It was, perhaps, the most honest thing he'd ever sent her. She didn't decide right then. But that night, she didn't work late. And for the first time in weeks, she let herself sleep. Rachel stared at the letter again the next morning. The paper had softened at the edges overnight, as if her hesitation had begun to soak into the fibers. She ran her fingers along the handwriting one more time, her eyes catching the familiar curl of his signature. She folded it neatly, tucked it back into the envelope, and placed it in her coat pocket. Just in case. The morning unfolded like every other. She scrubbed in on a routine cholecystectomy, reviewed rounds with the interns, and sipped a lukewarm coffee in the residence lounge while pretending not to think about room 203 on Bainbridge Island. But by mid-afternoon, the weight of the letter had become unbearable. That's how she found herself on the ferry by sunset, coat collar turned up against the wind, the Seattle skyline receding behind her. The city lights blinked against the gray water like hesitant Morse code, a distant language she no longer wanted to decipher. The journey was quiet. She didn't call ahead. Didn't give herself a chance to change her mind. By the time she pulled into the small gravel parking lot of the Bainbridge Recovery Center, the air smelled of pine and salt. The building was simple, tucked among trees and shadowed hills, its windows glowing with warm light. The kind of place designed to help people forget the noise of their pasts. She stood in front of the reception desk, heart drumming a rhythm she hadn't heard in years. I'm here to see a patient, she said. Ethan Carter. Room 203. The receptionist glanced up. You're expected. Rachel blinked. I am. He told us you might come. Said if you did, no need to buzz him. Just knock. Rachel nodded slowly, then followed the hallway down, the carpet muffling her footsteps, the hum of the building whispering around her. At room 203, she paused. She raised her hand. And knocked. The door opened within seconds. Ethan stood there in sweatpants and a soft navy sweater barefoot, looking healthier than he had weeks ago. Thinner still, but alert. Present. Changed. Rachel's breath caught. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said. I wasn't sure either, she replied. He stepped aside, wordlessly inviting her in. The room was small but cozy, wooden floor, a single bed with a gray comforter, a small bookshelf stacked with novels, and a desk cluttered with notebooks and coffee cups. A window opened to the trees beyond. Nice place, Rachel said, standing awkwardly by the door. It's quiet, Ethan replied. I've needed that. She looked at him. How's the recovery? Physically? I'm fine. I go for walks. I eat kale now. I even journal. Mentally, he paused. Still a work in progress. Rachel nodded, unsure how to bridge the gap between them. Ethan motioned toward the armchair. You want to sit? She hesitated, then sat. He took the edge of the bed across from her, not too close, not too far. Silence settled like mist. Finally, Rachel said, "I got your letter." "I figured," he replied. "I didn't want to pressure you. I just wanted to be honest." She studied him. "You've changed." "I had to." "You left me," she said, the words falling out like pebbles. He looked down. "I did. I was grieving the idea of never having children. You made me grieve you too." Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper. "I hated myself for that. I told myself it was about the future, about legacy. But it wasn't. I was scared. And selfish. I couldn't handle imperfection." Rachel's throat tightened. "You thought I was broken." "No," he said firmly. "I thought I was. And instead of facing that, I blamed you." The honesty of it sliced through her. "I've spent years rebuilding myself," she said. "I thought I'd buried you so deep you'd never surface again. And then fate put us in the same ore." She let out a short, bitter laugh. "Yeah. Fate has a twisted sense of humor." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "I don't know what happens next. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I'd like the chance to earn back your trust. Even if only as a friend. Even if from a distance." Rachel looked at her hands, the same hands that had pulled him back from death. The same hands that had once worn his ring. "I don't know what I want," she admitted. "I'm angry. I'm tired. But I'm also not ready to slam the door shut. Not yet." Ethan's shoulders eased. "I'll take not yet," he said softly. They sat there for a long time, not quite facing the past, not quite planning the future. Just existing in the fragile, awkward now. Eventually, Rachel stood. "I should head back. I have a surgery in the morning." Ethan nodded. "Thank you for coming. It means more than you know." She paused at the door, turning to look at him one last time. "I didn't come here to give you answers," she said. "I came here to see if I still had questions." He nodded. "Do you?" She met his gaze. "Yeah, I do." Then she left. Driving back under the blanket of night, ferry rocking gently over dark waves, Rachel felt something strange inside her chest. It wasn't peace. It wasn't closure. But it was a beginning. And for now, that was enough. The following week slipped past in a blur of surgeries, consultations, and the ever-evolving rhythm of hospital life. Rachel kept busy. She always had. But now, between sutures and scans, her mind wandered, not to the past, but to a cabin room on Bainbridge Island, to a man she thought she had buried under years of resentment and silence. She hadn't responded to Ethan's follow-up text. Not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't know what a response would mean. A door opening? A floodgate breaking? A second heartbreak waiting behind the smile of redemption? On Thursday evening, after a long day in the ore, Rachel sat on her apartment balcony, the spring air carrying the scent of wet concrete and cherry blossoms. She sipped from a glass of red wine and opened her laptop. Her cursor hovered over Ethan's name in her contacts list. She didn't call. Instead, she clicked open a new email window. Subject: dinner. Message: there's a Thai place on Mercer Street. You used to love their green curry. Saturday, 7 p.m. If you're still into kale, they've got salad too. Rachel. She hit send before she could overthink it. Ethan read the email 3 times. He was in the recovery center's reading lounge, surrounded by empty chairs and a shelf of half-read novels. When the notification chimed, he expected another check-in from Marcus or an update from his assistant. He didn't expect her. He smiled. A real one this time. Not one of those polite curvatures reserved for nurses or well-wishers. This one stretched across a face that hadn't remembered how to smile for a long time. He typed 2 words. Reply: I'll be there. Saturday came with sunshine and uneasy nerves. Rachel chose a simple black blouse and jeans, opting for familiar over dramatic. She didn't tell Michelle or anyone else at the hospital. This wasn't a date. It was a meal. A conversation. A moment in neutral territory. When she arrived, Ethan was already seated by the window, a table for 2, dressed in a crisp button-up and slacks. He stood when he saw her, looking like a man both hopeful and uncertain. You came, he said. You said you'd eat kale, she replied. He chuckled and motioned for her to sit. Guess we're both compromising. They ordered without much fuss, green curry for him, pad thai for her, spring rolls to share. The familiarity of the food loosened something in the air. So, Rachel said, once the waiter had left. Still journaling? Every day, Ethan nodded. Helps clear the noise. I've been writing about the company too. Thinking of stepping back. Rachel raised an eyebrow. You're going to retire? Not retire. Just reprioritize. He paused. I spent years trying to prove something. Now I'm not sure I even remember what. Rachel sipped her water. And what about now? What are you trying to prove? He met her gaze. That I can be different. That I can be enough, even without the empire. She nodded slowly. Their food arrived, interrupting the quiet confession. The plate steamed, the aroma a comfort they both hadn't realized they missed. They ate in relative silence for a few minutes, save for the occasional comment about the food or the music drifting through the restaurant. But beneath the surface, everything was humming with tension, familiar, fragile, and waiting to be addressed. Finally, Rachel put down her fork. There's something I need to ask you, she said. Ethan set his glass down. Anything. If we hadn't met again like this, if the accident hadn't happened, would you have ever reached out? Ethan didn't answer immediately. He looked down at his hands, then back at her. No, he said honestly. I wanted to. 100 times. But I was ashamed. I didn't know how to explain walking away from the person I loved. Rachel held his gaze. Do you still love me? Ethan nodded. Yes. The answer hung in the air like a thread stretched taut. Rachel looked away. I'm not asking because I want a grand gesture, she said. I'm asking because I need to understand if this is nostalgia or something real. It's real, Ethan said. But I know that doesn't mean it's right. Or easy. Or something we can just pick up from where we left off. Rachel's voice softened. There's no going back. Only forward. He nodded. Then let's start from there. They finished dinner with less heaviness. The plates were cleared, and they shared a small dish of mango sticky rice like they used to on late nights after long shifts and startup meetings. As they walked out into the cool evening, the city lights blinking across the bay, Ethan stopped at the edge of the sidewalk. I want to see where this goes, he said. Even if it takes time. Even if it's slow. Rachel looked at him. For once, he wasn't trying to sell her a dream. He was standing in the aftermath of it, offering nothing but himself. I'll let you know if I'm ready, she replied. But tonight was a good start. He smiled. Then I'll wait. They stood there a moment longer, not kissing, not touching, just two people finding their way back to something they thought was lost. Rachel turned to go. As she walked away, Ethan didn't call after her. He just watched. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the need to chase. Because maybe, just maybe, this time, she'd find her way back on her own. The days after their dinner fell into a rhythm of cautious communication. Ethan didn't flood her with messages or invitations. He sent one text a day, sometimes just a photo of a sunrise from his morning walk, a quote from something he'd read, or a question, simple, honest. Rachel didn't always reply. But she read every word. It was strange, this new way of knowing someone she had once known so deeply. Like walking into a familiar room after years away and finding all the furniture rearranged, the colors changed, yet something in the air remained the same. She found herself smiling at his messages, even the ones she didn't answer. Her chest no longer felt tight every time his name popped up on her screen. Something inside her had started to thaw. But just as she was beginning to trust that stillness, the past, relentless and sharp, found its way back in. It came in the form of a letter. Not from Ethan, but from a lawyer. Rachel found the envelope in her hospital mailbox late on a Tuesday evening. The return address was familiar, the firm that had handled their divorce 5 years ago. She stood frozen in the hallway, white coat still buttoned, stethoscope dangling at her side. She opened it there, fingers trembling. Inside was a formal notice. Ethan Carter's legal team had filed a motion to amend their original divorce settlement, citing a clerical inconsistency regarding property ownership. Specifically, a small plot of land in the San Juan Islands, land they had once bought together in the early days, dreaming of building a summer cabin. Rachel stared at the words. A clerical inconsistency? They hadn't spoken of that land in years. She hadn't thought about it once since the divorce. Her phone rang 10 minutes later. It was Ethan. She didn't answer. She didn't answer when he called again an hour later. Instead, she went home, sat at her kitchen counter, and reread the letter in disbelief. The next morning, he showed up at the hospital. He waited in the parking lot until she ended her rounds, then approached her near the loading dock, looking more disheveled than he had in weeks. "Rachel," he said, breathless. "I just found out about the motion. I didn't file it. It was my legal team. They've had standing instructions to clean up old paperwork. I swear I didn't know." Rachel crossed her arms. "You expect me to believe that?" "I didn't even remember that land existed," he said. "Until last night. I called Marcus. He checked the filing dates. They submitted it before we met again." Rachel stared at him, jaw tight. "Why didn't you withdraw it when we started talking again?" "I didn't know they hadn't already," Ethan said, frustrated. "I thought it was dead paperwork. I'm calling them today to reverse it." She didn't reply. He stepped closer. "Rachel, I'm not trying to take anything from you. I don't care about that land. I care about," he stopped himself. "I care about not ruining this second chance." She looked at him long and hard. "You said you'd changed," she said quietly. "But your world still spins on money, on control, on what can be filed and amended and managed." "I know how it looks," he admitted. "But I didn't come here to defend a legal technicality. I came because I don't want you thinking I would ever try to undermine you." Rachel exhaled slowly. The wind blew a strand of hair across her cheek. "I need time," she said. "I need space to think." He nodded. "I'll give you whatever you need." He turned to go but then paused. "I didn't fall in love with you because you were convenient," he said, not looking back. "And I didn't lose you because you weren't worthy. I lost you because I was." That night, Rachel sat on the edge of her bathtub, the letter crumpled beside her, her phone silent on the counter. She thought of the land, of the cabin they once designed together with pencil sketches and wine-stained fingers. She remembered laughing as they argued over window placements, arguing about how many trees to keep, which direction the porch should face. She remembered believing it was forever. And now this, a forgotten piece of paper capable of cracking open everything she had barely begun to rebuild. She didn't call him that night. She didn't answer his text the next morning either. But she did walk into the hospital's legal office and ask for an independent review of the filing. Not to fight it, just to make sure there were no more inconsistencies hiding in the shadows. And while she waited for the report, she worked. She operated on a newborn with a heart defect. She comforted a woman losing her father. She stayed up 3 nights in a row to cover for a colleague's emergency leave. But inside, she was unraveling. At the recovery center, Ethan kept his distance. He returned to his journal. He called his lawyer and demanded the filing be retracted immediately. He wrote Rachel another letter. But this time, he didn't send it. Instead, he folded it and slipped it into the drawer beside his bed, where it joined a growing stack, letters she might never read, but that helped him feel like he was still speaking to her, even from afar. Marcus came to visit on Friday, bringing work updates and headlines about a rival tech company's merger. "I told them you're still out of commission," Marcus said. "But it won't be long before the board asks when you're coming back." Ethan leaned against the window, arms crossed. "I'm not sure I am coming back," he said. Marcus blinked. "What?" "I think I want out. Not forever. But I don't want to run a machine anymore. I want to build something real." "Like what?" Ethan turned and smiled faintly. "I'm still figuring that out." On Sunday, Rachel got a call from the hospital lawyer. The motion had been officially withdrawn. No assets were being disputed. The matter was closed. Still, the damage lingered. She drove to the San Juan Islands that afternoon. Not because of the land, but because she needed to stand in the place where they once made promises, to see if any trace of them remained. The plot was untouched, overgrown, silent. But as she stood there, wind biting at her sleeves, she didn't feel anger. She felt something else. Grief. Not for the paperwork, but for what had almost been. She knelt, touched the soil with bare fingers, and whispered into the earth, "I forgive you." Not to Ethan. To herself. Rachel didn't call Ethan after visiting the land. She didn't need to. What she'd gone looking for wasn't him, it was closure. And somewhere between the tangled brush and mossy soil, she'd found the piece of herself that had once clung to anger like armor. Now she was tired of armor. She returned to Seattle with windburned cheeks and callous thoughts, unsure of what the next step should be. But something had shifted. That much she knew. That Tuesday, she ran into Michelle in the hospital cafeteria. "You look different," Michelle said, eyeing her over a salad. "You're softer." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Softer? I mean that in the least offensive way possible." Rachel smiled. "Maybe I'm just sleeping more." "Or maybe," Michelle added, stabbing a cherry tomato, "you finally talked to the man whose name you've been muttering in your sleep since March." Rachel didn't confirm or deny. But Michelle saw the truth in her silence. "Whatever you're doing," she said, "keep doing it. You deserve peace, Rach. Not penance." Later that night, Rachel sat at her desk, her laptop open, cursor blinking. She thought of the unsent letters Ethan had likely written. She thought of their dinner. Of how he didn't ask for anything except space and the chance to prove who he was now. She wrote a single line in an email. "Are you free Thursday night? There's a new art exhibit downtown." She hesitated before hitting send. Then she closed the laptop and went to bed. Ethan stared at the message for a long time. He hadn't expected it. After the land debacle, he'd braced for silence.
Meb permanent.
He told himself he could survive without her, but the lie tasted sour every time he swallowed it. He typed, "Yes. I'll meet you there. 7 p.m. When Thursday arrived, he wore the same navy coat she once gifted him the winter before their split. It still fit. And it still held the faintest scent of cedar from their old apartment. The art gallery was minimalist, modern. Clean lines and concrete. But the exhibit inside was anything but sterile. Titled "The Spaces We Leave Behind," it was a collection of installations built around the idea of emotional absences, rooms filled with empty chairs, suspended doorways, beds without sheets. The artist's intention was to explore grief, memory, and the echoes of intimacy. Rachel stood in front of a piece titled "Unspoken." It featured 2 vintage telephones, hung inches apart, cords frayed, receivers suspended in midair. There was no sound. Just silence. The absence of a call that never came. Ethan joined her wordlessly. They stared together for a long time. "It's eerie," Rachel said. "It's honest," Ethan replied. They moved through the gallery slowly, pausing at a sculpture made of keys that opened no doors, a wall of photographs where every subject had been erased, leaving only the backgrounds, a park bench, a dinner table, a wedding aisle. When they reached the final room, Rachel turned to him. "Do you think people really change?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "I think people can return to who they were meant to be," he said. "Sometimes life forces us to become someone else just to survive. But the core, it never really disappears. It just gets buried." She studied him. "And who were you meant to be?" He smiled softly. "Someone who doesn't walk away when things get hard." Rachel nodded, her throat tight. She glanced around. The room was empty now, save for them. "I forgave you," she said. Ethan blinked. "When?" "Last Sunday. On the island." He exhaled, something in him deflating, like a breath held too long finally released. "Thank you," he said. "I didn't do it for you," she added. "I did it so I could finally stop carrying you around like a wound." Ethan accepted that without protest. "I want to be in your life," he said. "But not if it means reopening old pain. If all we ever share again is art galleries and emails. I'll take that. Just to know I didn't ruin everything." Rachel turned toward him. "It's not everything. It's just the beginning." He looked at her, unsure whether to hope. Then she did something unexpected. She reached for his hand. And for the first time since that hospital night when she saved his life, they stood side by side, not as doctor and patient, not as ex-lovers laced in regret, but as 2 people choosing to stand in the present. When they stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights shimmered across the wet pavement. Ethan walked her to her car. Before she got in, She turned to him. There's something I haven't told you, she said. His brows rose. I've been looking into fertility options. For myself. Ethan nodded slowly. I didn't want to bring it up. I'm not doing it for you, she said. Or us. I'm doing it because I need to know I tried. I need to stop living like the door has already closed. He reached out, brushing her wrist gently. No matter what happens, he said, you're not broken. You never were. Rachel looked away, blinking fast. Let me drive you home, he said. She hesitated, then nodded. That night, she let him walk her to her door. They didn't kiss. They didn't promise anything. But when she stepped inside and turned on the lights, she found herself standing in a room that no longer felt empty. She curled up on the couch, legs tucked beneath her, and opened her laptop again. She began to type. Not an email. Not a report. But something else. A journal entry. For the first time in years. She titled it, The Spaces I'm Willing to Reopen. It happened 3 days later. Rachel was halfway through her afternoon rounds when her phone buzzed. It was a call from Marcus. She hesitated. He rarely called her directly. Answering in the hallway, her voice was low. Hello? Rachel, it's Marcus. I don't mean to alarm you, but Ethan just collapsed during a board meeting. Rachel's heart stopped. What? He was pale, disoriented. He stood up to speak and just went down. We called the ambulance. He's being taken to Harborview. She was already walking toward the elevators. I'm on my way. At Harborview Medical Center, the emergency team was already working when Rachel arrived. She spotted Ethan through the glass of Trauma Room 2, unconscious, oxygen mask in place, monitors beeping in steady rhythm. One of the ER doctors spotted her. Dr. Park. Yes. You're listed as emergency contact. She hadn't known that. What happened? She asked, walking beside the gurney as they prepped him for scans. Preliminary signs suggest cardiac arrhythmia, possibly stress-induced. He hasn't been taking his blood pressure meds consistently. Has he been under unusual emotional strain lately? Rachel swallowed. Yes. They wheeled Ethan away. Rachel stood there, hands trembling. Her brain, trained to assess vitals and prognosis, refused to function. She was just Rachel now. Not Dr. Park. Just a woman terrified of losing someone, for the second time. Hours passed. Ethan was stabilized and moved to a cardiac unit. He would need further testing, but his life wasn't in immediate danger. Rachel sat by his bed long after visiting hours ended. She watched the slow rise and fall of his chest, the faint flutter of his eyelids. The man who had once stood on stages and lit up rooms now lay silent, fragile beneath wires and plastic tubes. You promised me time, she whispered. Don't you dare break that promise. He stirred in his sleep, as if hearing her, but didn't wake. When he finally opened his eyes the next morning, Rachel was asleep in the chair beside him, still in her scrubs, her hair tousled, her face pale. Ethan blinked slowly, trying to speak. Rachel stirred at the sound. You're awake, she said, rushing to his side, voice hoarse with relief. I'm not dead, he rasped. No. But you tried your damn best. He chuckled, then winced. Don't make me laugh. She took his hand, warm now, alive. Why didn't you tell me your health was declining? She asked. I didn't want to worry you. Ethan, she said, voice firm, we're past that. You don't get to shield me anymore. Not if we're going to do this. He looked at her, vulnerability open in his eyes. I was scared, he admitted. That if you saw how broken I was, you'd walk away again. She shook her head. I didn't walk away last time. You did. Silence stretched. I know, he said. And I'll regret that for the rest of my life. Rachel stood. Then stop making the same mistake. Start trusting that I'm here because I want to be. Not because you've earned me, or saved me, or deserve me. But because I choose to be. Tears welled in his eyes. I'm terrified, Rachel. So am I. But I want to fight for this. Even if I'm weak. Even if I screw up. She leaned forward, pressed her forehead gently to his. Then let's fight, she whispered. In the days that followed, Rachel returned to work part-time while Ethan remained under observation. He underwent a cardiac stress test, adjusted medications, and met with a psychologist. But more than anything, he listened. To the nurses. To the doctors. To his own silence. Rachel visited every evening. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just held hands. One night, she brought him a journal. "Write," she said. "Even if it's messy." He nodded, eyes shining. "I want to be better. For you. For myself." She squeezed his hand. "Then start here. Not out there. Not at boardrooms or investors' dinners. Here." A week later, Ethan was discharged. He didn't return to the penthouse. Instead, he moved into a small rented flat near the recovery center. No skyline views. No private chef. Just a desk, a kitchen, a second-hand couch. Rachel visited on Sunday. He made her tea. They sat at the kitchen table, the window cracked open, spring air filtering in with the scent of rosemary from the neighbor's garden. "I've decided to resign," he said. She looked up. "From your company?" "From running it. I'll stay on the board for a while. But it's time." She sipped her tea, heart quiet. "Good," she said. "What now?" "I want to travel. Volunteer. Write. Rest. Build something new." He met her eyes. "With you if you'll let me." She didn't speak right away. Then she stood, walked to his side of the table, and knelt down. "I can't promise forever," she said. "I don't need forever," he replied.
Juste honesty.
"And time." She smiled, tears slipping down her cheek. "Then let's go slowly." He reached for her hand.
Slow sounds perfect.
6 months later, the rhythm of their lives had changed. Ethan no longer woke to boardroom alarms or late-night strategy memos. He woke with the sun, made his own coffee, and walked through the park near his apartment every morning, sometimes stopping to sketch the trees or jot poetry lines in his weathered journal. Rachel, meanwhile, had moved into a quieter hospital division, a specialized trauma care unit, where she focused on both patients and teaching young residents. Her pace was still brisk, but it no longer came from a place of running. She was grounded. Steady. They didn't live together. Not yet. They still had separate keys, separate schedules, separate spaces. But every Sunday, without fail, they met. Sometimes for brunch. Sometimes for hikes. Sometimes to just read side by side in the sun. There were no grand declarations, no promises sown with urgency. Only a growing understanding that what they were rebuilding wasn't a replica of what they'd lost, it was something entirely new. Ethan kept writing. Rachel kept healing. And both kept choosing. On the first rainy evening of fall, Ethan invited Rachel to join him for a small dinner at his place.
Nothing fancy.
Just him, her, and a slow-cooked stew he'd watched 3 YouTube videos to master. When she arrived, she found candles on the table, Miles Davis playing low, and the scent of rosemary, thyme and garlic drifting through the air. "You cooked," she said, amused. "I also didn't burn anything," he replied proudly. They ate, talked, laughed. And when the meal was done, Ethan poured her a glass of wine and handed her a small wrapped box. Rachel raised an eyebrow.
What is this?
"Nothing dramatic," he promised. "Just something I've been working on." Inside the box was a book. A hand-bound journal. Its title, in simple type. Midnight Collision, Notes from the Edge. Rachel opened it slowly. Inside were pages filled with Ethan's handwriting, entries from the hospital, reflections on his collapse, sketches of her face drawn from memory, fragments of old arguments reimagined with softer endings. He had written their story. Not the one about the crash. The one about what came after. Rachel read silently, flipping to a page where he'd written, "The night I almost died, I didn't see my life flash before me. I saw the woman I'd left behind. And in that instant, I understood, love isn't about perfection. It's about presence. And sometimes, it takes a collision to see the road clearly." Her hands trembled. "I wasn't sure you'd want to read it," Ethan said, voice quiet. She closed the book and looked at him. "I do," she said. "And not just because it's beautiful." She paused. "But because I see you in it." Not the man who left. Not the man who got rich. But the man who came back. The one who stayed. He nodded, emotion catching in his throat. There's one more page I haven't written yet, he said. Because it's not my page to write. He handed her a blank sheet tucked into the back.
It's for you.
If you ever want to add to it. Or not. Either way, I'll keep the book open. Rachel stared at the page. It was such a simple gesture. Yet it felt like the most honest thing he'd ever given her. No rings.
No contracts.
Just space. Shared space. She set the book down, stood, and walked to the window. Rain tapped gently against the glass. I've been thinking a lot about that night, she said. The crash.
No.
The surgery. The moment I realized the man on the table was you. He waited. I could have walked away, she said. Another surgeon would have taken over. But I didn't.
Not because he still loved you.
I didn't know if I did. She turned. I stayed because I needed to prove to myself that I could face what broke me, and not break. Ethan looked down. And now?
Now, she said, walking closer, I'm not afraid of breaking anymore.
She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. Because I know I can rebuild. He pulled her gently into his arms. No words were needed. 2 months later, they bought a cabin. Not in the San Juan Islands, but a modest one on Whidbey, close enough for weekend drives, far enough for the world to fall away. It was old creaky, with mismatched tiles and a fireplace that smoked too easily. But they didn't mind. They painted the walls together, filled the shelves with second-hand books, and planted rosemary by the window. They didn't name the cabin. But if they had, it might have been something like,
Where the light break through.
Because that's what it became, a place where healing took shape, where laughter echoed again, where once wounded hearts learned to beat not in spite of their scars, but because of them. A year after the accident, they returned to the city to attend an art show. It was the same gallery as before. The same artist. The new exhibit was titled Reclamation. One piece caught their eye, a mirror, fractured down the middle, its cracks filled with gold lacquer, inspired by the Japanese art of kintsugi.
The plaque read.
Beauty does not lie in flawlessness. It lives in the mending. Rachel looked at Ethan. He smiled. Later that night, they stood in the cabin kitchen, steam rising from 2 mugs of cocoa.
The fire craquait lazily behind them.
I never thought we'd get here, she said. Me neither, he replied. But I'm grateful every day we did. They clinked mugs.
Note à célébration.
But as reminder, that sometimes, the most powerful stories aren't about second chances. They're about the courage to choose again. And again. And again.